Right. Imagine being Keir Starmer right now. You wake up every morning, probably check your phone, and immediately see another headline about how your government is imploding. Another revelation about Peter Mandelson's dodgy connections. Another poll showing your approval ratings have found a new basement beneath the basement you thought was rock bottom. You drag yourself to Downing Street knowing that today is going to be worse than yesterday and tomorrow is going to be worse than today. Because this scandal is not just refusing to go away, it is actively getting worse with each passing hour. And the truly beautiful part? It is entirely self-inflicted. Nobody forced Starmer to appoint Mandelson. Nobody held a gun to his head and said, "You must bring back the Prince of Darkness," despite all his baggage and all his toxic associations. He did this to himself. And now he is fighting for his political survival like a man clinging to a life raft in a hurricane while someone keeps poking holes in it. This is not just a scandal anymore. This is a full-blown political crisis, and Starmer is discovering in real time that fighting to save your skin is considerably harder when you have already lost most of it. If you want to watch every twist and turn of this absolutely glorious political train wreck as it happens, hit that subscribe button and smash the notification bell right now, because this scandal has more chapters than War and Peace, and we are nowhere near the ending. So let us talk about what fighting to save his skin actually looks like in practice, because it is absolutely fascinating to watch. Starmer has deployed every trick in the political playbook, and none of them are working. He has tried deflection, pointing to conservative scandals and asking why people are not focusing on those instead. Newsflash, Keir, when your own government is embroiled in a scandal involving connections to one of the most notorious criminals in modern history, whataboutism is not going to cut it. He has tried minimization, suggesting that people are overreacting and that the Mandelson connections are being blown out of proportion. That strategy lasted about 5 minutes before more damning evidence emerged and made him look like either a liar or completely out of touch. He has tried the unity approach, calling for the party to rally around him and focus on governing rather than getting distracted by scandal. But here's the problem with that approach. When the scandal is about your catastrophically poor judgment in making a senior appointment, asking people to ignore it and focus on your governing is like asking them to ignore the fact that you set the house on fire and just appreciate the fact that you're trying to rearrange the furniture. It's not exactly compelling. And most recently, he has tried the bunker strategy, limiting his public appearances, avoiding journalists, hoping that if he just stays quiet long enough, the storm will pass. Spoiler alert, the storm is getting stronger, not weaker. The latest developments in the Mandelson scandal are absolutely explosive, and they explain why Starmer is in full survival mode. New documents have emerged showing that the vetting process for Mandelson's appointment was not just inadequate, but potentially deliberately bypassed. We are talking about standard security checks that somehow were not completed, background investigations that were rushed through or ignored entirely, red flags that were raised and then mysteriously disappeared from the official record. This is not just incompetence anymore. This is starting to look like a systematic attempt to get Mandelson appointed regardless of what proper procedures would have revealed. And here's where it gets really juicy. There are now allegations that Starmer personally intervened to override objections to Mandelson's appointment. Civil servants apparently raised concerns, security officials reportedly flagged issues, and according to multiple sources, Starmer essentially told them to process the appointment anyway. If these allegations are true, and the evidence is mounting that they are, then Starmer is not just guilty of poor judgment, he's guilty of actively subverting the safeguards that exist to prevent exactly this kind of situation. That is not just a political error. That is potentially a constitutional crisis and possibly even criminal misconduct. The pressure on Starmer is coming from every direction simultaneously, like being attacked by a swarm of particularly aggressive wasps, except the wasps are MPs, journalists, constitutional experts, and increasingly his own party members.
Conservative MPs are tabling questions in Parliament demanding explanations that Starmer cannot provide without either lying or admitting catastrophic wrongdoing. Reform UK is calling for his immediate resignation on a daily basis, with Nigel Farage delivering increasingly savage takedowns of Starmer's handling of the crisis. The media is in full investigative mode, with new revelations dropping almost daily that make the scandal progressively worse. But perhaps most dangerously for Starmer, the rumblings within his own party are getting louder and more organized. This is not just a few disgruntled backbenchers anymore. We are talking about senior labor figures having quiet conversations about whether Starmer can survive, about who might replace him, about how to manage a leadership transition without completely destroying the party's electoral prospects. When your own MPs start wargaming your departure, you're in serious trouble. When cabinet ministers start distancing themselves from you and refusing to defend your decisions on television, you are approaching the end. And that is exactly where Starmer is right now. The public polling is absolutely catastrophic for Starmer, and it's getting worse with each new survey. His personal approval ratings have collapsed to levels that make previous unpopular prime ministers look beloved by comparison. The government's overall rating has tanked. Labour's lead against the Conservatives, which used to be substantial, has evaporated and in some polls has actually reversed. We are looking at a government that won a comfortable majority becoming genuinely unpopular in record time, and the Mandelson scandal is the primary driver of that collapse. Voters are not just disappointed, they're angry. They feel betrayed, lied to, taken for fools, and that anger is not going to dissipate just because Starmer wishes it would. The strategic problem Starmer faces is that there's no good way out of this mess. If he keeps Mandelson in position, the scandal continues and probably gets worse as more information emerges. Every day Mandelson remains is another day of devastating headlines and another hit to Starmer's credibility. But if he sacks Mandelson now, after defending the appointment so vigorously, he looks weak and indecisive, and he essentially admits that his judgment was catastrophically wrong all along. Either option is politically damaging, which is the definition of being trapped. Starmer has managed to paint himself into a corner where every possible move makes his situation worse. There's also the question of what else might emerge, because scandals like this rarely exist in isolation. If Starmer was willing to override normal vetting procedures for Mandelson, were there other appointments where corners were cut? If he was willing to ignore warnings about problematic associations in this case, what other warnings has he ignored? The opposition is asking these questions loudly, and the fact that Starmer is not answering them is only increasing suspicion that there is more to come. The drip, drip, drip of revelations is arguably more damaging than one big disclosure would be, because it keeps the scandal in the news day after day and creates the impression of an administration that is fundamentally corrupt and secretive. Now let's talk about the international dimension of this crisis, because it is absolutely devastating for Britain's standing in the world. Foreign governments are watching a British Prime Minister fight for survival over a scandal involving appointments connected to Jeffrey Epstein, and they are drawing conclusions about the stability and judgment of British leadership. This is not the kind of news that inspires confidence in international partners. Diplomatic relations depend partly on trust and respect, and it's very hard to maintain either when your Prime Minister is embroiled in a scandal this toxic. Britain is supposed to be a serious country with serious governance, and right now we look like a banana republic where the rules don't apply to the powerful and accountability is optional. The economic implications are starting to emerge as well, because political instability has real-world consequences beyond just Westminster drama. Businesses and investors want stable, predictable governance. When they see a government in crisis, when they see a prime minister fighting for survival, when they see scandals dominating the news cycle to the exclusion of actual policy, they get nervous. We are already seeing some concerning signs in the markets, with sterling weakening and investment decisions being delayed. None of this is directly caused by the Mandelson scandal, but the broader instability and uncertainty that the scandal creates absolutely have economic knock-on effects. Starmer is not just damaging his own political prospects, he's potentially damaging the entire country's economic prospects through his catastrophically poor judgment. The media coverage has evolved from initial shock to sustained investigation to something approaching a death watch. Political journalists are now openly discussing not if Starmer will survive, but how long he can cling on and what will trigger his eventual departure. The tone has shifted from reporting on a scandal to reporting on a government in terminal decline. That shift in narrative is incredibly difficult to reverse, because once the media decides you're finished, they start interpreting every event through that lens. A policy announcement becomes a desperate attempt to change the subject. A reshuffle becomes rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. A speech becomes a last-ditch effort to salvage credibility. Everything gets framed as part of the ongoing collapse, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Social media has been absolutely merciless because the